Celtics wins the game at the buzzer.
The Board Bettor podcast.
What up, everyone? Welcome to the Board Bettor Show. I'm your host, Josh, better known as Pun School on Twitter. Today, another fantastic guest who arguably knows hoops as well as anyone. I think it's fair to say Matt Moore from the Action Network and from a whole bunch of other places too. But Matt, I appreciate you taking the time to come talk ball with us, my man. How are you doing?
Good, man. Thanks for having me. Excited to be on with you.
Yeah, like I said, there's plenty of opportunities to find your work basically plastered everywhere and anywhere that anyone who pays attention to basketball would have undoubtedly come across it. But for today's show, as per normal, I mean, everyone knows the segments that's tuned in before. We'll have our homework review, taking a look at things we've learned in the league recently. We'll do a scouting report, which will be on the Minnesota Timberwolves today. They're a team that kind of fascinates me for a multitude of reasons. Then we'll look at the bets we've made for today, any futures bets as well that are standing out. And then, of course, everyone's favorite squad ride, where we will hopefully get back in the winning column for you guys there after taking your first L on the last show. But let's jump straight into it. Let's take a look at our homework review. Matt, for me as a Boston fan, yesterday was a little bit painful and frustrating for a multitude of reasons. But I just wanted to touch on the Celtics offense in particular. So no Marcus Smart for the last week now. I think it's fair to say that the offense without him is not an elite offense. Not having him as the initiator, empowering Tatum and Brown as playmakers seems to bring out the worst tendencies, I think, in those guys at times. During this mini losing streak, a 104.7 offensive rating, that's bad. On the season, they have a 118 offensive rating with him on the floor versus a 113 with him off the floor. Their assist percentage as a team takes a notable dip as well without him. 65% with him on the floor in terms of assisted field goals. 65%, of their field goals are assisted. 60% when he's not on the floor. So another one. Joe Mazzulla sort of touched on their struggles at the moment with playing at pace, spacing the floor in the way that they do. And I think those two things are what Marcus Smart really brings to the table. Matt, for you with the Celtics right now, do you think this offense is missing him in a way that will continue until he returns, or do you think they can figure things out?
I mean, I think they can probably figure things out. The system's been so kind of consistent. And, I think Smart definitely operates a really important role as a connector for those two and to be able to kind of facilitate things. He's great in transition in terms of having a heads up and making plays like that. He finds a lot of easy points off of steals and opportunities like that. I think some of this kind of gets into the shooting variance of the Celtics for the entire season, right? So like they went on just like an incredible shooting run there for about 2 months, and they were shooting like 7% higher than kind of expected there for a long range. And then like it's gotten to be, I think, it's regressed a little bit too far the other direction since then. And so I kind of wonder if that's got something to do with it. I mean, when we look at it this season, like I will say this, like their expected shot quality goes down by quite a bit points. Like that's an important stat in terms of like this offense needs to create high percentage looks. It's one of the things that was really interesting about this team's run this season. This team is not loaded with like incredible offensive talent. This isn't the Warriors. This isn't one of those teams that's like stacked to the gills. Tatum's incredible. Jalen's been incredible. The rest of the guys are role players that have shot the absolute lights out. And some of that has been like natural regression. I do kind of think that like Smart returning the lineup will help. I think it'll be interesting to kind of see like, are they evolving more into what we kind of saw in the playoffs last year, which was pretty good offense, not great, pretty good offense, elite defense. And if that's like maybe closer to what we should expect from them based off of a number of factors, I think that kind of led to an outlier performance the first couple of months of the season. But I do think when Smart comes back that their floor is still high enough for it to be a good functioning offense. But in the meantime, look, I do kind of wonder if unders are going to be a good play for the Celtics.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm leaning towards as well. Looking at obviously the results the last couple of days, I was on a team total over yesterday. It went to overtime. I bought a couple of times onto that team total, so I cashed a couple of those. Fortunately, the early play did not get there because it was a 117.5, and Jaylen Brown went 0 for 2 at the free throw line and left them stuck on 117 points, which is a little bit frustrating. But just like I said, even if you dive in a little bit more, no one, I don't think, on the Celtics, just looking at their numbers as well, no one has more of an offensive impact to this team outside of Jason Tatum than what Marcus Smart does. And so I do think he's one of those guys who is still going to be a little bit undervalued in terms of what he brings to the table from the market. And I don't think that they're going to adjust in a way that properly reflects that. So completely agree with you. I think maybe Boston Celtics unders in the short term here for the next week or so are still going to be on the card until the market really catches up with us there. So for purposes of trying to project, I think, where this one goes, do you think it's a better look to look at their full game or team total unders versus fading them per se on the line? Or do you think fading Boston against the spread is probably the better look?
So without Smart, they've gone the under is 7-2 this season. So that's obviously like a fantastic mark at 78%. Let's take a look at what their team total is. See, the team total is only, let's see, 4-5 to the, or 5-4 to the under. So I actually think that there's probably, the market's probably going to adjust pretty well for it, and they'll probably overrate Smart's defensive impact given how good the rest of the Boston's defense is. So I think taking the under is probably a smarter play, just from the perspective of it gets you two ways to kind of get home there. Either the opponent's offense is going to get overestimated by the absence of Smart defensively, or the Celtics are going to struggle to score, and the market may account for that, but it may be enough to get you under anyway. So I just think that probably playing the under in these games, not as a blind fade, but in certain given spots, obviously, puts you in a pretty good position to find the right moment to take the under. But I think they're definitely like a never over until Smart gets back.
Yeah, it might just be as simple as that. And as well as one more sort of footnote on that is their pace of play also drops considerably when Marcus Smart is not on the floor. So that obviously factors into things as well. Just before we move on from the Celtics, yesterday they rolled out Robert Williams, Al Horford frontcourt as a starting lineup. Do you think that they are now going to start integrating Robert Williams more into that starting five? Or is it basically going to be one of those things where it just becomes matchup dependent and Mazzulla's going to roll things out depending on who they're playing on any given night?
I think he'll probably move into the starting lineup. I have a hard time seeing a scenario where he's not like back to being the starter by the end of the season. I just think it makes the most sense. It's good for him in terms of his minutes. It's important for his contract priorities, those types of things. For the long term, you want to be established that way. He's been so important to them defensively. Their offense doesn't take any sort of massive dip. So I kind of think that we're going to see a stabilization with Williams and Horford as the starting kind of front court going forward.
Yeah, I could see that for sure as well. So definitely the takeaway, I think, definitely keep an eye on the unders for the Boston Celtics until Marcus Smart returns. I think there's a good opportunity to stay ahead of the market there. Full game unders, the better look. I agree with Matt on that for sure. And let's just see how much adjustment gets made over these next sort of 3 or 4 games in particular as to whether we can stay ahead of that movement there. Let's get into, though, our next segment here, because I do want to do our scouting report on the Minnesota Timberwolves, because like I said, they're just a team that really fascinates me at the moment. I think they might be better than a lot of people are giving them credit for right now. Matt, I'll be the first to put my hand up and say that I thought this team was going to roll through the regular season. I really did think that the fit would work. I thought Finch would be able to work things out. Obviously, in hindsight, I think all the signs were there as to why it wouldn't. I mean, these guys didn't really get a preseason together at all. Cat missed basically the entirety of the preseason. And I think as well, one thing that I personally didn't really look into properly was the fact that Finch as a coach has done a tremendous job when he's been able to sort of play a team that can space the floor with just the one big. And I think it's as much about him learning the best way to utilize his new pieces as it is them trying to come to grips with incorporating Rudy Gobert into their individual games as well. So going back to one big, I don't think it's surprising to see that they have sort of been a little bit more consistent. They're still a team that can, I feel like, lose to anyone on any given night. And that's what Finch said as well after that Houston loss. But they are a team, I think, trending in the right direction on the whole. Where do you stand on the Minnesota Timberwolves right now? And then does that view change once Cat comes back into the rotations?
So I have them really high. My power ratings love them. A lot of my ratings are influenced by half court performance, and this is the 13th best half court offense and the 8th best half court defense. Like I don't think people realize how good the defense has been. Which you say like, well, they've got Rudy Gobert, and that's true, but you still need supporting defenders, and we saw that last year, right? With the absence of that the Jazz kind of slipped down the table. One of the things I think that's really fascinating about them is if you look at it. Their on-court offensive rating with Rudy Gobert is 108. That's horrible. Like that's so bad relative to today's standards. But their defensive rating is 108.7, and that's incredible. They really are kind of this very, I hesitate to use bipolar for the stigma there, but they're a team of real extremes, right? Where when Rudy's on the floor, they can't score, but no one else does either. And then when Rudy's off the floor, they can light it up, but they can't get stops. And so they've really struggled to find that balance between the two. I think, I wasn't surprised that they struggled out of the gate. I didn't expect it, but I wasn't surprised at it. And before Cat got hurt, I had kind of said, I want to give them till the end of January to see if they can figure this out because it does take a huge adjustment period. We're now at the end of January. Cat's been out 2 months and they've stabilized. And a lot of this is you say like they can lose to any team any night. And I agree with you. But part of that is if we take how the team has developed and what they figured out about each other and how to play together and how Finch has coached them, and then you add in what Towns would bring to the simple floor of the team offensively as a stabilizing force, that to me kind of like removes a lot of that threat. That helps with those situations where they're losing to these random teams on a night by night basis. And they've gotten some really good wins in between. Like they've actually found a way to compete at a pretty good level. They've been really good against the spread, I think, because the market continues to be very much like, oh, they're not good. There's been like a real slow adjustment to like, no, like the Wolves are fine. No need to be treating like this is not the Hornets. And so I think there's been like an opportunity to bet on the Wolves consistently. You have to be careful about your spots. They're yet another team, and like a lot of them, you never want them as road favorites. You only want them you want them as home dogs. You want them in that situation. I also just think that some of this is kind of proof. You talked about Finch being able to play with one big. I don't even think it's necessarily that. I think it's that Towns went out, and that eased a lot of the tension from the egos on this team because there's a lot of ego on this team. Like Rudy Gobert is basically trying to revalidate himself as like a premier big man after being considered like a liability. And was supposed to come into this year and be most improved player candidate and like making the leap. Doesn't happen in part because the offense is so clunky, and the only way to make it function is you got to run pick and roll with D'Lo and Gobert, and that takes the ball out of Edwards' hands. When they've moved Edwards back into like a more prominent role, it's worked out really well. The big question with this team is what they're going to do at the deadline, because like there's a lot of noise. Like they are shopping for point guards, and they are willing to attach assets to D'Angelo Russell, who is still a like starter caliber player, even if it's like he comes with a lot of problems, and he does. I'm not sure he's playable in a playoff series, but they're willing to attach assets. Like they try to get in touch and they try to get something done for Lowry. I don't think that's going to happen, but they are in these conversations with these point guards. If you had a veteran point guard that can defend and just set the offense, who can hit spot up shots next to what they've got going when Towns gets back, I actually think this team is probably going to be under the radar, a good buy spot, and probably make some noise in the playoffs.
Yeah, when I caught wind of the Lowry rumors, that immediately struck out to me as almost the perfect fit for that team on the court and off the court. I feel like he's the type of veteran presence they need in that locker room to kind of pull them all together and ensure that everyone's on the same page. And like you said, just as an offensive initiator who understands his role within the team and understands who needs the ball, when and where, it would just make too much sense, I think, for them not to explore options all the way up until the deadline if they aren't able to get something through and over the line. Matt Porter mentioned in the chat as well, this is the exact sort of time frame where they became a bet on team last year and they went on a roll and streaked things together. And I think that kind of ties in as well to Chris Finch just being a really great coach, and one that I think is still very underrated as a whole in terms of being able to piece together what he has and ensuring that they are able to maximize their value at both ends of the floor. And like you said, when it comes to the defensive end of the floor right now, they are so undervalued. The assumption that Rudy Gobert is just not the same guy anymore is so strange to me. I think he's just getting way too much criticism so far. He's still an elite rim protector. He still does a fantastic job at deterring people from wanting to attack the rim in particular. And like you said, in the half-court sets, their half-court numbers are fantastic. I mean, they're starting five at the moment with Towns out. Defensively, it has a 104.3 points per 100 possessions allowed, so 88th percentile in the league for 5-man rotations. And, I don't want to go into too much about later because we'll talk about it in the best bet segment, but I love them tonight in this spot and in this matchup particularly. And I think that, this is a team that, like you said, in the right situations, especially when they're catching points, I think they're a dead on bet team. The biggest question mark still obviously is going to become playoff times. Do you think even if they find that upward trajectory and they work things out, are we going to still have that same situation in the playoffs where Gobert is just basically unplayable in playoff sets?
Good question. I'm going to say no. And so what teams will do, last season, it really wasn't challenging Gobert in switch. That's what it was like the previous 3 seasons. And Rudy put a lot of work in to get better in those situations. So instead what they do is they're just like, well, all right, if all you can do is protect the rim, we're just going to space you out. Like we're going to play 5 out. We're going to space you to the corner. I think the issue now is like, all right, so who are you going to attack? And the answer is going to be D'Lo. Like that's the problem here. It's like you need Jordan McLaughlin on the court in those situations if you don't make a trade. Like you want Kyle Lowry, you want, even with how he's diminished, you want Mike Conley, you want Fred VanVleet, you want any of these point guards that are available on the market to instead be that pressure point, because then it's like, okay, we can't get a one-on-one advantage. We don't want to go at Ant. We don't want to go at Kyle. We don't have like a good counter here. So let's run pick and roll with a spread out. Like let's play 5 out, put Rudy to the corner, and we'll play pick and roll versus Karl Anthony Towns in the guard. The problem is like the Wolves, the thing that they are best at in non-Rudiness is they are great at the level of the screen. So then the Wolves will just blitz it with Towns and a guard coming over to apply pressure. And what that creates, if you have to keep the guard, the center and the corner to space Rudy out, you're not playing 4-on-3 then. You're trying to play 3-on-2. And that gets a lot harder because even though the dynamics are kind of simple, Rudy can recover and put a little bit more pressure. You can get those rotations and it gets a little bit better. So like, I still believe that there's an upside here depending on the matchup. Now, if they face like the Nuggets, you're doomed because the Nuggets are like, we don't need to space you out. We don't need to run pick and roll at you. Like Jokic is going to score on Gobert, and that's like you're going to have to double, and we're going to rip you to pieces. But I think some of these other matchups could be really interesting. Again, like if they get the Grizzlies again, I'm gonna like I was on Wolves plus 2.5 on the win spread line in that series last year. I bet the Wolves game by game. I will do it again. I will not bet the Wolves on the money line because they absolutely ripped my brain in half with their mistakes down the stretch. But I will absolutely be in that position to take them again. I think the Wolves will probably be undervalued. They have a better capacity to limit those problems than what Utah did last year.
Yeah, and the mistakes part as well. I mean, this just ties back to the current situation. I think when you look at like a lot of their offensive struggles, they just turn the ball over so often and so frequently that it is putting extra pressure on themselves for when they do actually execute their sets to have to finish at a very efficient rate because their number of possessions is far lower than what it should be at the end of the day. They're bottom 3 in turnover percentage on this season as a whole. You look at basically every single 5-man rotation that they have run that has played at least 50 possessions together, and all 10 of them rank in the 22nd percentile or worse in turnover percentage offensively. So those sloppy mistakes are still, I think, the Achilles heel for this team. If they can find a way to figure that out and just be a little bit more precious with the basketball, I think we're going to just see a natural uptick in offensive efficiency, in their offensive rating, in their half-court sets, and in their points per possession as a result. So, yeah, that's one thing. I don't know if that comes down to personnel per se, but I, for one, think this team needs to get off of D'Angelo Russell as soon as possible, not just for his on-court deficiencies, but I think his off-court demeanor is something that is just lingering in that locker room in a pretty big way. And that's one of those things that you can't really quantify, but Matt, I think you can agree in saying that there's obviously an issue there, and that's going to bring down the team as a whole.
I think they like him. The thing is, like, he really loves basketball. Like his attitude, I actually don't think is a problem. I don't think that his teammates like don't like being around D'Lo. Like he comes off as a dip to us, but like it's the NBA. There's a lot of dips. Like the bar is low here. So I actually think that they like him. I think the bigger thing is just like they understand the limitations. Last year, like that Grizzlies series was instructive because he had torched them, torched that team, and should have had a monster series. And instead, like as soon as the Grizzlies were like, well, we're yanking Steven Adams, we're putting in Brandon Clark, and we're switching everything, D'Lo just vanished, and that's a real problem. Look, I can tell you, like, it's not like the Wolves are split on this. They're not like, ooh, boy, but D'Lo's really good. Like, they've been trying to move him. Like, everybody in the league knows the Wolves want off of D'Lo. It's a matter of who's going to wind up biting the bullet and taking a chance on him because they've got stuff that they want to move. And I think that could be coming here in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed for Minnesota's sake, I think, and also for us as well, because like you said, I think that automatically makes this team very intriguing and one that will still continue to be underrated in the marketplace for a little while. So from a short-term perspective, I think that there's a really good opportunity on Minnesota. Longer term, I think, it comes down to what did they get in place of D'Lo. And then when it comes to playoff series, I don't think this is a team you want to necessarily be investing in your portfolio for long-term futures bets. But I think the best way to attack them in the playoffs is going to be on a series-to-series basis. Matt, would you agree with that?
Yeah, you don't want to get any futures on them. It's entirely possible that they wind up in a 7-2 or a 3-6 that's really bad for them. I think even like Pelicans, I'd have to work through the matchups a little bit, but on surface, I'd be like, ooh, I don't know if I like a Pelicans match. Like the Pelicans match that physicality so much when they're fully healthy. So you really need to take it series by series. But I do think that there'll be a good spot where I think they will definitely be undervalued if they're able to make it into the postseason. And even if they're in really play-in tournament range, as long as they're not going up against a team like Golden State or the Clippers or any of these teams that we kind of think are elite, but just having rough regular seasons. If they're facing a team that's more inconsistent, like Portland, if they're facing any like the Jazz, if they're in the range of those teams, I'm probably going to be on the Wolves because I like what they've got, what they bring to the table a lot more. Yeah.
Before we move on from this to look at our best bets, actually, I would love to hear your 2 cents on Anthony Edwards right now, because I obviously, much like I think a lot of people expected that leap this season for him to be basically almost a runaway for most improved player by this point of the year. What we saw from him in the playoffs last season was a player who, for me, really cemented himself as the face of this franchise going forward. How much of his struggles this season have been the new team around him, the new fit, and trying to find himself in this scheme versus potentially Minnesota not quite just handing him the keys, I think, like a lot of us potentially expected, and still, siding with Cat as their main guy and then him as the guy of the future versus right now?
If you want the biggest warning sign from all this, it's that Ant didn't take on the role of, hey, this is what we did and this is the guys that we got and we've got a squad and we're going to make a run and I'm going to make it work. Like that was not the approach. Like if you read the preseason interviews with him and the media day stuff, it's like, well, be honest, we were kind of confused why we made the trade at all. Like we had a really good run last year, and you could tell that he was like, but like I was the star and we had this great run and it was awesome. Why are we changing it? And like, you have to be smart enough to be like, no. Like we can't undo the trade. Like this is what we got. And you got to be able to make a run with that. And I think that he struggled early on with how to fit into the two big system. Like if you don't have spacing around him, it's going to be harder for him. But that's not to say that you shouldn't try and accommodate him. I think you should, but there are ways to do that they were just struggling to kind of figure out. I think like Cat was trying so hard to be all things. Like, okay, do I need to space the floor? Do I need to play big inside? Like, do I need to be aggressive? This continues to be kind of like an awkward situation. There's a lot of ego in that room now, but there's also just like a lot of usage that has to go around in terms of the talent. And again, we kind of get back to the simplest way to make this work is, all right, we're going to run 1-5 with D'Lo, Gobert, and the other two will space around it. Except that one isn't what those guys have done most of their careers, and two doesn't make the most of their talents. And we've seen that like Edwards has been pretty awesome since Cat went out. And that's less about Cat being out as it is about opening up opportunities and the floor with only Rudy in the dunker spot for Ant to be able to attack. And we even see that with the on-off splits, right? Where when Rudy's off court and Ant's on court, they're dynamite offensively. And you're seeing that a lot. The long-term answer here is probably that the Wolves are going to have to move on from Karl Anthony Towns. And that's going to be like a Titanic move. That's going to be like send shockwaves, but like that's just like the logical thing here is you're going to have to choose between Ant and Cat. You're not going to be able to move Rudy. So you're going to wind up moving Cat. You can get great return. That's actually the best way for them to go forward. They could get a boatload in return for Karl Anthony Towns. So that's probably the best way to go about it. But it's going to take a while, I think, for the Wolves to come to that realization.
But they can't move Cat, right? Hypothetically, even if they try to force him to the deadline, I believe they have to wait till the summer, right? Because of the super max contract extension. Yeah. So that'll be a really interesting topic, I think, to cover in the offseason. I'm all on board moving Cat. I think it's time for player and team, to be honest. And it could be in the best interest of both of those guys moving forward. So, I think we are pretty much in alignment in terms of Minnesota being undervalued and underrated right now, having potentially a higher ceiling, I think, than the market is willing to accept or give them credit for. And the worst of Minnesota, I think, being behind them, even when Cat does come back into the rotation. So let's go dive into the bets we've made for today. Have a look at today's slate and what is on offer. Like I said, I love Minnesota today, Matt. I grabbed them +2.5 at plus money. I took the under in this one as well for a couple of reasons. So on our last show is part of our homework review. I sort of spoke about the Memphis Grizzlies offense with Steven Adams off the floor now and the pressure that it puts on their half-court sets. Not having someone who is so good on the offensive glass and that creates so many second chance scoring opportunities. Their half-court offense, not great. Their points per possession, their points per play, their shot quality possessions in half-court sets, all bottom half of the league for Memphis. And as much as Minnesota is vulnerable, in like we said, when it comes to turning over the ball and allowing Memphis to potentially run in transition, I think that the point of emphasis here from Chris Finch is going to be basically just don't do that. Let's get them into those half-court sets. Let's have them funnel everything inside and attack Rudy at the rim. And we like our chances in that matchup. So I'm on the under. I'm on Minnesota with the +2.5 here. I make it basically close to a pick by my numbers. Do you have anything for that game in particular?
Yeah, I've got 2 on it. I'm on the Wolves money line as well. That's a half unit play for me. Like the spot, like the number. I have this with actually I have Wolves as a slight favorite in this one, so not a hesitation for me. My bigger play is on the under. You kind of outlined all those reasons. The Grizzlies half court offense on the road is just miserable. Like it is just because at home with the crowd behind them, they can get downhill and really attack you.
Yeah.
On the road, that's a lot tougher. The concern is the Wolves are 25th in opponent points off of turnovers. And that's the only way that you give the Grizzlies offense real life is they've got to be able to turn you over, get stops, get turnovers, and then rush downhill. So that's like a concern, but the number's so high. Now the market, I think it's interesting because over at Action Network on the app, like we've got the money coming in on the under and the bets coming in on the under, and this is ticked up. So like clearly like there are sharp bettors that are on the other side that are putting in money towards the over. But I'm still comfortable with it. I like the under a lot in this spot. I think it's Wolves or nothing, and it's got to be under or nothing for me at 237, 238.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we do get a late buyback here on the under just before tip-off as well. I think that's where the money's going to come from. Apologies. I have a child who's apparently having a tantrum next door for God knows what reason. Maybe she doesn't like these plays as much as I do. But Minnesota for me. I'm also liking the Cleveland Cavaliers OKC to go over that total. I know it's ticked down a little bit. I know that there's a lot of support on the under in that game in particular as well, but this is just another one of those spot plays for me. I love taking the over on an East Coast team playing their second game of a West Coast road trip. It has been very profitable for me, a nice spot, and I like the matchup here. Obviously, Cleveland's bigs, I think, are just going to have their way inside. They can play above the rim. They can create a lot of second chance opportunities. Obviously, we need to wait and see exactly who plays because there could be some more outs before tip-off there. The Thunder as well, I think, are just going to be able to push pace and do what they do what it is that they want to do and do best as well, which is run wherever possible. And I think that Cleveland are going to find themselves in a game where they're being a little bit more up and down than what they're used to and what they would normally like to do, just given the spot and situation. So I'm on the overs there. And yes, I'm on the Indiana Pacers. This is purely just a numbers play for me. I hate it. I don't like it. I grabbed a 7.5. I think it's ticking down to a 7, it seems, in most places. I have it at a 5. I can't get it higher than a 5, even with Indiana playing the way that they have been without Halliburton. I know the offensive struggles that they have, but I just think as well from a matchup perspective, there's a potential avenue for them to be successful offensively. The Bucks give up threes. Their scheme defensively has always been to protect the rim, to not allow teams into the paint, pack the paint as much as possible. Obviously, they have two elite paint protectors there in Giannis and Brook Lopez at the moment. But the Pacers, for me, obviously they're happy to shoot the three, space the floor, and I think that they could have enough success if those shots are falling to keep themselves within touching distance here. So anything in those two, Matt, for you, or anything else on the card for you?
These are the two that I don't like tonight. I will say I do like that overplay on Cavs Thunder. I'm staying away from it, but my model does put this up at 228, which gives you that's a good 6.5 points of value on it. So I lean that way. OKC overs in games where they're home favorites. They are 7-2 to the over. So that's a good spot there. OKC's offense I did the bet cast for the Hawks and Thunder this week and was like, oh, this should be like an under game. No, it was like, it was ridiculous how much they scored. So, but nothing for me on that one. Nothing for me on Pacers, Bucks. Typically, I've auto played Bucks versus division opponents. They've been the best team in the league, maybe in history, versus division opponents.
I mean, like if this was last year, I'd probably just say play Milwaukee, alt spread them up to -15. Like they truck division opponents, but it's not been the case this season so far.
It's true. They're 6-6 in those games this season, which is really strange for them. Now, this is a good test case. I'll say this: if they annihilate the Pacers, the next division game, I'm going to be right back in. I'm going to be like, all right, the old Bucks are gone from this season. The old Bucks are new again.
Yeah,
and I'll be back on them. The ones I like tonight, though, I like Golden State -5.5. Raptors.
Okay.
Raptors on the edge of a road trip. We got Warriors at home. Warriors should be in a position to want to get right here. Raptors, that win versus the Kings was good. They've been a little bit better, but I just don't think you can trust Toronto. I'll go ahead and lay the points. I'm getting the best home team in the NBA as only a 5-point favorite here versus a team that I projected way lower. So I'll go ahead and I'll take the Warriors. And then I got Magic +7.5, and this is now 8.5. So the market disagrees with me. I will keep going back against the Heat. I just don't see is there any reason for the offense to get better? No. Are they more healthy? No. There's no reason for their offense to really get better. And they're on the road here. So with Orlando catching points this many, I think this number ignores a little bit of how good Orlando has been as of late, especially against the spread, especially as a dog. They're better, obviously, at home versus on the road here. And that's tough, but I will just I make this game I only make this game Heat -3. So I've got to be on the Magic here at the numbers play, but kind of like your Pacers pick, I'm not exactly thrilled with it. So I'll go ahead and I'm taking the Magic, but I'm feeling worse about that one by the minute.
No, it's getting to a point where I will join you on that as well. The highest I can get to is 5.5, 6 for the Heat. I don't know how we're getting now to that 8.5 range. That's too many points. And like you said, I think the one thing as well, the season metrics for Orlando just look so bad, especially offensively. But we forget they had that cluster injury of guards where they literally had no guards for so long. And if you sort of focus in on the games where they have had at least two of those guys, Fultz and Cole Anthony or Fultz and Suggs, available in the rotations and starting games, their offensive rating is much, much better than what their season metrics indicate there. So I think they can absolutely hang with the Heat. I think that their length and size could cause Miami a little bit of problems as well. I mean, Bam's the biggest guy on the floor for Miami, and he's 6'9", 6'10".
Yeah.
It's not going to be a comfortable matchup for them. And I do think Orlando's defense as well can kind of contain Miami a little bit there, especially those guys that like Bam, like Jimmy in the mid-range. They have the length to challenge and make life really uncomfortable for you there. So I'm probably going to be on the Magic as well if that hangs around at 8.5 at a nice price, because I can't get close to that number either. So that is all for us for the bets we've made for today. Let's get to the one segment that everyone tunes in for, which is Squad Ride.
You're very confident, I'll say that. But you shouldn't be.
All right, Matt, Squad Ride time. Basically, we have a Discord community chat full of sharp guys, full of less sharp guys. I'm not going to tell you who these players come from, whether it's the sharp ones or the less sharp ones. But here's what we have in the Discord chat that they have put forth as their best bets. I'm going to throw them all to you. You tell me which one you think is the best and which one will be the official squad ride pick for today.
Okay.
So we have the Milwaukee Bucks first quarter -2.5 seems to be a very popular one in the Discord at the moment, as well as the Milwaukee Bucks first quarter team total over 30.5 points. We have the OKC Thunder first quarter money line, and then we have a couple of player props as well. So Draymond Green over 8.5 rebounds, Steph Curry over 4.5 3-pointers made, Pascal Siakam over 1.5 3-pointers made, and a Draymond Green extension here, which is over 15.5 rebounds and assists. So of those player props or of those first quarter plays that they've put forth, which one sticks out to you as the one that you like the most?
What's the line on Bucks first quarter?
Bucks first quarter is -2.5.
Oh yeah, we're doing that one. 100%. We're taking Bucks first quarter. This is like the third best first quarter team versus the dead last. When the Pacers never win that first quarter, they only come back from behind without Tyrese Halliburton. Yeah, no, I may not be able to get on the full game because of how they've done, but I'm absolutely we're definitely doing Bucks first quarter -2.5. That's the play.
They the Pacers suck so much in the first quarter. Did you see the other day where Miles Turner didn't even contest the the opening tip, and they sort of hinted that basically they were trying something different to snap out of their first quarter woes. So they didn't even bother challenging for the tip off, thinking that, I don't know if it was just more so a joke and something that they wanted to like experiment with. But
here's one. I got one for you. First quarter without Tyrese Halliburton, it's 33.4 for the opponent to 27.6 for the Pacers. So that is a solid almost 6 points of differential on average in the first quarter without Hallie. So
that's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, even with Hallie, they were bad in the first quarter. For whatever reason, the starters just couldn't get it going in the opening 6 minutes. The bench would come in and sometimes give them a little bit of a spark. But yeah, I can't disagree. Bucks first quarter at -2.5 just makes so much sense. It's the most popular one in the Discord by far. And that looks like it's going to be the official squad ride for today. So hopefully back to winning ways on the official squad ride picks. But that is all for us for today's Board Bettor show. We have touched on quite a number of things. I've had a lot of fun. Matt, again, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Talk hoops with people over this side of the world. Take a quick second, let everyone know where they can find your work, and there is a lot of it.
Yeah, just download the Action Network app. Best way you can track your picks. You can get all sorts of cool information in there on all sorts of great stuff. All my podcasts for Buckets, a daily betting show on the NBA is in there. And as well as our Green Dot Daily, we got a live show about betting, all sorts of great stuff. Just check it out on the Action Network app.
Perfect. And guys, appreciate everyone joining in the chat as always. And those of you who download later, listening on Spotify or wherever it is you listen to your podcasts. Again, a lot of fun today. We will be back next week with a few more episodes and a few more guests as well to chat more NBA hoops. Best of luck with all of your bets today, everyone. And we will see you all again soon.